Welcome everybody to our brand new channel, State of the Industry. This is your host Mike Pugh, along with my co-host, the man with a plan, Jeremy Vandeman, and another special co-host with us, Alicia Naya. And here we have a special guest we're going to be interviewing today for a new reoccurring segment called Voices of the Industry. Welcome, Meliza Fermin.
Yeah. So thank you, Lacey and Meliza. Well, Lacey for coming back, Meliza for being willing to share a little bit of your time and some of your story.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So just kind of starting off, tell us a little bit about your story in visual effects. What is it that you do? How long have you been working in the space?
And we definitely need a little more than just how awesome you are.
No. So I am a visual effects artist. I am both a compositor and a matte painter. I have been in this industry for 20 years and started right out of school. I was in Virginia and I was lucky enough. They had a studio there that worked on like FBI files, The New Detectives, those type of shows.
Hmm.
And I had just like cold emailed them and said, hey, I know these softwares and I want to work in TV or film. Do you guys want help? And they wrote me back and hired me. So it was great. That's how I got started.
That's awesome. So what part of Virginia?
The company was in Suffolk, Virginia.
Okay, gotcha.
It's called New Dominion Pictures. Yeah, they had a back lot and everything. It was actually very cool.
And what's interesting, real quick, about that story is you did exactly what I tell students to do all the time. So many students graduate from college and they go, well, I need to put a new reel together. I'm waiting to finish this project. And I'm like, do you have work to show? Are you eager? Apply. Apply now. It sounds like you did that, and that is very smart.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even like see if they were hiring. I knew that my skills, in Photoshop, After Effects at that time would be helpful for what they did. So yeah, it worked out really good.
That's awesome. And that's inspiring for any students who are listening if they want to get in. Cold calls still exist.
Yes, and you'll be surprised who actually gets back to you.
Well, actually, what happened with this company that I'm teaming up with, I cold called them and was like, hey, you're missing a VFX supervisor. And they were like, we are? I'm like, yes, you are. And I pitched to them, and now I own 5% of the company, and I'm one of the people that is going to help build it up from the ground up based off of a cold call.
Wow, that's awesome. So when I was living in LA, I moved to San Antonio and tried to do that. I reached out to every production studio I could find, every post-production studio I could find, which there weren't many in San Antonio. And I don't think I had a single person get back to me.
That's where that dynamic of when the time is right and when you know the right people, and that's when that dynamic fits in.
Yeah, when you're starting out, it really helps. I mean, that's the same thing I did. I moved to LA. So after I worked there for a couple of years, I was, ready to go to LA. And when I moved to LA, I was on the internet and I printed a list of all the visual effects companies I could find and sent them my resume. So some of them actually called back for interviews and I went on different interviews. And that's how I got my first job in LA. So you just have to be brave, I think, when you're starting out.
Well, and after working with you, you are very assertive. You're a go-getter. And those are attributes that are recognizable right off the bat about you. You know how to talk to people. You know how to make decisions. And that's a big one. If you can't make decisions, you're hemming and hawing over something. People don't want that.
Even with outside of work or the things, even at home, I don't know, it's very important for me to be moving forward, even if it's little steps.
Mhm.
That's how I am at work. At home, okay, even if all I'm doing is, I don't know, washing a cup. You know what I mean? Like my time is very important and I feel like I have to be doing something that's moving me
But
forward.
did you know if you do any volunteer work that's specific to your industry, you could write that off as a tax write-off saying, I volunteered this much of my time, which is worth this.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that either. That's good to know.
Yes. I mean, they'll probably only accept a portion of it, but your time is valuable. You're right. And we like to stick it to the government.
Right. It is something that they allow, and it is something that if we're doing that, then we should be able to take advantage of that. There's nothing wrong with that at all.
Now, I think you have to register as a nonprofit, but I do know that there is an angle that you can take where you can dedicate your time. I don't know all the semantics because I haven't done it yet, but I plan on doing it this year.
Interesting. I may actually be able to help you out with that. I have a friend of mine, Raven Krogstad. She has set up a nonprofit in LA County trying to help out the homeless individuals that are in the film industry. She and I worked together on for, gosh, a few years, kind of trying to get it started, registered as a 501(c)(3). It is an official nonprofit organization that's approved by the federal government. And we've done a few art galleries for painters, visual artists. So not necessarily in the film industry, but still in the entertainment industry. And our sites were set very, very high, and not enough traction has been gained on it. But there has been a lot of charity progress in general to support that mission.
That's awesome. Congratulations. Meliza and I will probably be homeless here pretty soon, so we might have to take you up on that
Yeah.
charitable contributions.
Actually, that leads me into my next question. So, Meliza, where do you currently live?
So I live in Florida. I moved here after the pandemic, since everyone is work from home. We figured, hey, let's move somewhere we can actually afford a house because that was not happening in Los Angeles.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so that was my follow-up question. If you don't live in LA, what is it that made you move? But that makes a lot of sense.
There's no state tax here also. So that was a big deal. That's 11% back of my income. And my husband, who is not in visual effects, we knew that he could find a job anywhere in his field. So at least we're not both in entertainment, and it's not such a big risk to leave Los Angeles.
That was the same with my husband.
But when I moved here, I was sure that the company that I was working with would be fine, and I didn't expect a layoff. I'd been with them for about a year, and I thought, okay, this is great. They're work from home permanently, and I thought I can move and it's going to be great. I'll have a job. I won't have to worry about freelancing or being laid off.
And it was a great company too.
Yeah.
It was a really, really great group of people.
Yeah, exactly. I was very positive and I thought everything would be great when I moved here. And so when that happened, when all the strikes happened and they started letting people go, I was really upset. It really got to me because if companies started wanting people back, I'm like, well, I'm in Florida. I can't. I have to be remote. So that scared me a bit. But I do think that if you have a good network, it doesn't matter where you are, they'll come find you. That I believe in. And what's been happening lately showed me that that is true, right? Because I think one of the most depressing parts about, being laid off and is like starting over and applying to different companies where they don't know you, the recruiters don't know you. And not to talk bad about recruiters, but a lot of them, they really don't know, right? Like, I'm not saying like anybody big or whatever, but it's like, hello, like I'm experienced, I work hard, you know,
Mhm.
but they don't know that because they've never worked with you. So they're just like, sorry,
Along with the guys, Mike and Jeremy, you're on my nice list too. So if anything comes up for a matte painter, I mean, you're at the top of my list. So I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, I'm also a compositor, and that's what I tell people. So last weekend, a nice thing happened where a producer that I know contacted me last minute. And she's like, hey, I have this job. Like, could you do it starting tomorrow? And I was like, yeah, sure. I'm not doing anything else, But that just reminded me, see, this is how you get it done. It's the people that you know that you've worked with. They know that you can do the job.
Mhm.
They find you, right? When they need you. So I feel like if I'm going to work again, it's probably going to be through a connection.
Yeah, same. Well, no, I'm starting my own company. Grr.
That's exactly where I'm at. Well, kind of threefold. One is looking for connections that I have in the industry because that's realistically where you're going to find your work. Job search websites are just horrible for our industry because there's so much ambiguity that goes into our work that, like, you can say you're a compositor, but they might need a very specific type of compositing that maybe you're not used to, or maybe they don't know that you are used to it. Say they think they're looking for a VFX artist, but maybe they're actually looking for a VFX generalist and a compositor.
Right. Well, a lot of people like to lump VFX into the whole because it is confusing. You have your VFX supervisor, which watches over the entire post-production process and sometimes the entire production and previs. And then you have your effects artist that generates, water and fire and all of that stuff. So they don't know because the definitions are a little.
Yeah, and I mean, if you ever read some of these job descriptions, like I'm like, wow, entry level or mid level, but you have to know 3D, you have to know effects, you know how to composite, you have to know this. I'm like, no way.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I was just reading one earlier today that they were looking for a VFX editor. When it came down to it, the questions they were asking during the application process were basically looking for a production supervisor. I'm like, that's not a VFX editor. You're looking for
No.
somebody who can appropriately bid out an entire project with multiple layers of visual effects involved. A VFX editor literally just transcodes assets and organizes them for a VFX team. That's what a VFX editor does, or does onlining and stuff like that. They're not doing the actual visual effects.
Yeah.
That's a different role.
Well, even then, I mean, they might edit into a reel or prep for dailies, but they're not going to bid things out. That's the producer's job.
Right. There was actually a large carpet company position that they were trying to generate here in Georgia, and they're a carpet company and they do a lot of marketing. So they were like, you know what? We spend a lot of money on marketing. We should just start up our own production studio in-house with a small post team, small editorial team. And they already have an editor or two in-house, which basically the purpose is just to kind of organize the outside vendors. But they wanted to branch out this whole post-production company. And so I went through 3 rounds of interviews with them. And by the end of it, I was like, this is what's actually involved. And I feel like there's going to be a lot of training the company to understand what actually goes into it. Because I said, my only concern is you all think it might be easier than it actually is. And it is fairly involved. And this is kind of like the team that I would need under me to be able to properly build up the production studio.
Yeah.
I can do it. I've worked in small production studios before. I've bid out projects. I understand what goes into every step of the process, from drone work, camera work, audio work, editing everything together. I've done all of it before, but you can't do it as one person. It requires a team. It requires somebody to oversee the equipment, to oversee the actual production facility, and then another person to oversee the projects that are just focusing on the production side of things, another person to oversee the post-production side of things, and then one person to keep it all organized together. And that's just top level organization, because if you're going to be working on multiple projects pretty much right from the start, somebody needs to make sure that you have a server that can load in all of this information. But that's one of the things that I'm excited about with potentially starting up my own studio, is doing exactly that, is knowing all the different parts that go into it and finding somebody that's a really good fit for the smaller side of things, if you will.
Yeah.
Another challenge also, I've applied for jobs that I know I'm qualified to do the work. Photo editor, designing this, designing that, manipulating photos for ads, graphic design, which I have done. I know it's not visual effects, but I have done it in the past and I know how to use the softwares. So they see my resume and they see a bunch of TV work, visual effects, and they know that I'm not in their industry and they just cancel me out. And it's very frustrating because I'm like, I can do the work. I can do whatever you want me to do. You want a Photoshop artist? I can give you whatever you want. Like, I'm a matte painter. But yeah, they say, sorry, you don't fit what we're looking for. Only because I'm not in that industry, because my resume is full of TV film work. You know that you can do the work and you would probably be good at it, but they won't even consider you.
No, I completely agree. That really is a big thing with recruiters, is they're being given a description of the job from somebody else, and then they have to translate it based on their understanding, which may be extremely limited when it comes to the visual effects industry. So they hear, we need a photo editor, and you have matte painting experience. Say they need an illustrator for like a children's book or something like that. It's like, well, you have matte painting experience. You could very likely illustrate a children's book without much difficulty at all. You might need to know the proper specs for deliveries and things like that. But I mean, you understand how to paint potentially hyper realistic paintings. So,
Right.
I mean,
But they see visual effects and they're like, nope, she's not the one.
it's just bizarre because it is just a lack of recruiters' knowledge on the subjects that they're supposed to be recruiting for.
Right.
And instead of asking around to be like, hey, so if this person says they have this experience, would that work? Instead, they're just like, nope, it doesn't automatically look like it. It's kind of strange where, like you say, you have this broad experience where you have graphic design knowledge, you're a map painter, you're a compositor. So there's a lot of things that you can do. And they see that and they think, oh, well, if you're a jack of all trades, you're a master of none, which is not necessarily true. I mean, particularly with somebody of your experience level, 20 years experience in the industry is a lot of time to have developed multiple skill sets over and over so that you could have senior level experience in multiple aspects of the visual effects industry, as well as any kind of digital art.
Yeah.
They just miss it.
Exactly. They just miss it and they keep missing it. So I'm like, okay, that's why I came to the conclusion, like I said earlier, is you know what? My next job is going to be through someone I know because that's just how it's going to work out.
Yeah, well, and because they know that you are a master of multiple focuses.
But you know, even within visual effects, it's like I do feel like if people haven't worked with you before, it's almost like they don't really know what you're worth. So I feel like most jobs we get are from people that we've worked with before.
That's very true. And either people we've worked with before or people that have been suggested to us by people that we've worked with before.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's true also. Yeah.
And I understand why. I mean, the 2 year long project I was working on with Light Sail, I had to job post and find every single person that worked on the project. And we were working in Fusion, and almost every artist that I knew that was available was a Nuke artist. And I was like, I'll get you guys up to speed. I have pages and pages of documentation on how Fusion translates over to Nuke, Nuke translates over to Fusion, but it's going to take a little while to get up to it. And most of the artists I've worked with before are more traditional VFX artists, like VFX compositing artists. And this project was much more like 360 stitch work. So all of those concepts still applied, but with working in a new software and learning a new skill set, it was just beyond what a lot of people were looking for at the time. So the people that like my list of artists that I could reach out to was relatively small. So I did have to do a lot of online searches for artists that were willing to work with me and doing stitch work and using Fusion to do stitch work. And because of that, I had to hire people that said they could do the work without knowing for sure that they could actually do the work. You can ask Mike because he worked on it with me too. I went through entire teams after teams where these artists would come in and they'd be relatively new to the industry, but they'd say, don't worry, we can do this. We can figure it out. Doesn't sound overly complicated. And I'd have them do an art test and they do okay at the art test. And I was like, okay, as long as they keep growing and getting up to speed, they'll be fine. And then they would not be professional at all, where they would just work like 15, 20 hours a week without letting us know ahead of time. They would just no call, no show for meetings and like one thing after another after another, where I was like, this isn't working. We're not making legitimate progress. They're not actually reviewing the work that they do to make sure that they're hitting the notes that they're given. So it required effectively a mass layoff of the team and completely rehiring on a new team twice, maybe 3 different times. By the end, we had an amazing team that was just all stars and they were knocking out work left and right. And now I know that I can reach out to any of those artists that I ended the project with and they'll do a really good job. But for employers, I understand why they lean away from working with people that they haven't worked with before, because the turnaround time on the projects that we work on is so fast. And if you don't know their pipeline, if you don't know their workflow, if you don't know their quality expectations, and they don't know your work ethic, they don't know your work quality, there's a lot of unknowns that can be a huge setback for the project overall. I mean, they might go 2 weeks trying to have you complete a shot that they thought you could do in a week. And now they've lost 2 weeks. Plus, they have to now start hiring again, find somebody else that can pick up the work if they have to let you go. So
That's the thing too, isn't it? That you can do it in a week, but then you get notes. You can't possibly plan for the amount of notes that you're going to get.
This is true because when I was working first couple of companies, I was there for 5 years each, and they have always liked to staffed up people. Like most of the team members were staff. Occasionally during pilot season, we'll get freelancers, right? But they love to have a core group that is staff. And then I worked with a company who was not like that, very little staff, and hired lots of freelancers coming and going. And that was such a struggle because what you just said, we need someone for only a week. And I'm like, oh my God, a week is like, that's what it takes for them to get used, the onboarding, the pipeline, like sometimes 2 weeks, like what kind of work can that person do in a week?
That was the frustrating thing too when I was on the hiring side. I don't know if you remember, Jeremy, when I hired you, the silly questions that I was asking you. Yeah, I basically asked him to walk me through the process of tracking and what he would do first. And it was because we had hired people who came in and didn't know how to track. And in my very humble opinion, tracking is one of the first things you learn for compositing.
yeah, very few cameras are not moving.
But hello.
So I worked for Stargate Studios in South Pasadena. That was like one of my first major visual effects jobs. They used to have a bad reputation for, oh, pay well, you work a lot of OT, but I loved it because it's like the best first job you can get in visual effects because they're a small studio. They also wanted you to track your own shot. They wanted you to prep everything. You did everything. And I learned. So now, like, if you give me a shot, I can track my own shot. I can go into Mocha, go into Nuke Studio. There's a lot of things I can do. I can key very difficult keys because some of their supervisors didn't like things well. And, like when things are hard, that's when you really learn, right? And now I work for these other companies where the artists are your compositor. So they don't know how to track, like you're saying, Lisi. And I'm shocked. I'm like, you don't know how to track? No, they ask to send it to tracking. And I'm like, but it's not that hard. It's not like a difficult 3D track you have to send out.
Yeah.
So they want everything. I find some of the compositors I'm like, wow, they want everything. Like they really just want to comp the final shot.
Yeah.
It's given to them.
Whole aspect of the senior versus the mid versus the junior. People don't know where they land on that chart. So a lot of times you'll say, hey, I'm a senior compositor for film, which is a completely different beast than saying you're a senior compositor for episodics, because the timelines are different. The requirements are different. In one, you're possibly comping deep. In another, you're not comping deep. It's a different workflow.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you're sitting there saying, well, I'm a senior compositor. And then you come in to work on a TV show and everyone's going, why are you so slow? You're supposed to be senior.
Yeah. Oh, yes, exactly. I was at this company and we hired a bunch of freelancers. We were busy. I mean, I think now, with the streaming, we're all kind of at the same pace now. Like everybody has grown accustomed to the fast pace, right? But before, I was working on episodic and we brought in a bunch of film artists. And yeah, it was very hard for them to get used to the pace.
Well,
which I love the pace.
And it kind of makes sense too. With film, I mean, there's such a higher level quality expectation. Like if your grain is off for film, it's not getting approved. But for episodic stuff, I believe it, that's good enough. And for streaming, it's like halfway between the two.
I just think that now it has merged. It's not so separated anymore. And I think streaming really changed all that. Now there's a lot of high quality TV being made.
Yeah, I'm still not a huge fan of movies just because of the amount of time that you spend on one shot. I really do enjoy the creativity and speed of any episodics because it's like, okay, does it tell the story? Is there anything blaringly wrong? All right, get the shot out. I actually enjoy that kind of work.
Yeah, I'm the same way. Most recently, I worked on an episodic project where I got to hit a lot of shots because they set it up so that any roto had to be done, then it got sent out to a roto vendor. So I had every bit of roto just handed to me. So it was so easy to just jump in and do the work and move on. then there was another project that I worked on that was a pilot episode for an episodic pitch, and it was great. I got to do some really creative stuff, implement a lot of layered elements in ways that really told the story in kind of a supernatural sort of way, and it made it so that I could have fun with it as opposed to just isolating a single effect and just zoning in on that effect and making sure it's 100% perfect from every potential perspective, like 7 layers of reviews. And I think there's also something to be said for layers of complication and quality expectations for more complicated VFX shots as opposed to simple VFX shots. Like a screen replacement is going to go really fast, regardless of whether or not it's TV or film. And like integrating an explosion or something like that, that's probably going to be pretty easy. But if you're looking at something that has multiple layers of effects, there's a lot of creative review. I feel like that tends to require much more work on the front end to make sure that it's moving in the right direction before you get that final approval.
Yeah, agreed. But it also requires the producer to let the visual effects supervisor know that this shot needs to be due in 2 days and stop pixel it.
That is very true. That is very, very true.
That used to drive me crazy. I'm like, do you want the shot or not? Just send it. It's fine. Because especially you'll get those supervisors that'll hold on to a shot until they like it and they miss the mark because it's not at all what the client wanted.
Right.
Sending it and just showing them. That happened a lot at our previous info work, Lisa.
Like, send it.
Yes,
Send it.
that happened a lot. A lot of that nitpicking.
Yeah.
And a lot of trying to do everything in post instead of doing it correctly in the first place.
It's not just the supervisor, sending, it's with the artist too, right? Like when I work on something, I like to show it early just to make sure that I'm going the right direction, right? I'm not going to finish the shot and be like, here, do you like it?
They don't like when their creative input isn't being considered. This is supposed to be collaborative. It's not supposed to be, well, let's let this person shine.
Yes. And that's part of planning, I think, right? I was talking to my friend who is a visual effects supervisor. He works for Netflix and he goes, supervises their different shows. And I asked him, what company do you like working with? And he told me this company. And I said, why? He said, because I love how organized they are. They send us blocking gray scales of things. And he's like, I love it because it lets me view the shots like early on to see if it's going to work or not, if the cameras are going to work. He's like, they don't have to be full renders. He loves very early versions of shots.
It's almost like there's a whole department of previs that is useful.
Especially on very big sequences, right? Where you have all CG shots, all different cameras. Like that is so important. They have to approve the camera. Like I get it. Client will change their minds. Yeah, it happens. But for the most part, you should be sending those early.
That's the most important one to send early.
Yeah.
Does the camera movement work? I mean, if it doesn't work and you have to go all the way back,
Yeah.
holy crap.
I know. We could do a podcast on just this subject.
Oh, absolutely. The number of times that proper pre-production hasn't been done, and I'm sure all of us have had to pick up the pieces. And then after working for like 80-hour weeks for multiple weeks straight, we're told, oh, no, that's getting cut, and then we're going to reshoot that. It's like, oh, so literally every single bit of work that I did is just getting tossed in the trash and no one's ever going to see it.
Such a pain.
But that's one of the key things for me for like project management and VFX supervising, because I've done a little bit of on-set VFX supervising as well, particularly for virtual reality projects. And it's so crucial to have really solid previs and also to do tests. That's one of the other big things, is because if you don't do a test to make sure that it's going to work, particularly in immersive media, there's no guarantee that it's going to work. It might seem like it'll work, but you need to make sure that you at least get one shot that works perfectly well, is done start to finish, so that you can say, okay, this is how we did it. It worked. Let's keep doing it this way. Because there's so many times where it's like, well, theoretically that should work, and you just miss something. It's real easy to miss the little details of why certain things won't work together.
All right, I think that wraps our conversation for today. Be sure to check in the rest of the week as we have more segments coming up with Meliza. Be sure to like, subscribe, and tune in for the next one. All right, everybody. Take care.